The lights went out. Then the first explosion hit us. It flipped me through the air like a rag doll.
I honestly thought that I was going to die in there.
Already I've issued a 6-month moratorium on deepwater drilling. We need to know the facts before we continue.
It was a very prestigious job to work on the Deepwater Horizon.
How's my room? 338.
It was an outstanding rig because of the crew that was on it.
We were all up on the front here when everything happened.
Every one of the rig's defenses failed.
There were things that were done to save time and save money.
Transocean started eliminating positions.
When the decision was made to cut corners, it's putting them at increased risk.
We were behind schedule, so it was starting to cost them a lot of money.
They knew the hydraulics weren't working. They knew that there was rubber in the mud that was coming back up. That tells you something.
People were aware that things weren't going properly.
These are things that everybody knows are wrong, and they're still told to keep going.
President U.S. BP, were you aware of any problems with this well prior to it blowing?
No, I was not.
Margaret, it's great to see you again, and great film. And I want to start basically with the very end of the movie. There's one last line that says, "For my dad." Can you, speak about why, this particular film?
My dad's always been a fisherman, and people in that part of the country was really connected to the water and to the Gulf and to Mobile Bay. And so I think it just kind of broke my heart when I felt like that might be taken from him. It was like all I could do in the face of what felt like, when the movie started, like such hopelessness, like the spill coming toward the beaches up in the marsh. Like it just felt just really hopeless at the time.
And did he call you during that time and speak about it and his worries? Or?
I think I was in Ecuador when the spill happened, because I was working on a different movie down there, and he sent me pictures of our house surrounded by this orange boom that the volunteer fire department had put out to prevent the oil from reaching the shore. And there were all these workers from BP, and it was like the army had invaded. It was just very surreal. And so that was the first thing that kind of galvanized me to make the movie. It felt really personal.
I mean, because now this is your third feature-length documentary, so you know how long and hard it is to do one of these. So, one of my questions was, what was that moment when you realized, okay, I'm going to dedicate many years to this project?
I think I was interested in this idea of the news cycle, and what happens when the cameras go away? What does the story change when it's not being filmed by every major news outlet? And so I thought, well, I'll still be there with my local crew and, filming where I grew up, And so I think there was something about that I knew the film was going to be longitudinal, really early on. But what I didn't know was that it was going to not just be about my community, but I was going to get really curious about how are we all connected to this factory under the Gulf of Mexico?
I was amazed how you got the executives to open up and talk. I mean, can you explain how did you get their point of view?
I don't know, certain things were harder in the film to get than others, and those guys are super fun to hang out with and fun to drink beers with and to talk to, and they have insane stories about the oil industry. So that wasn't the hardest part of the film to get. I mean, it was hard to, I think it's hard to get people in the oil industry in general, because I think there's people who are afraid. I don't think they were afraid. I think they felt there's some, I mean, the oil industry is huge, right? And there's certain people in the industry, I think, who are more big oil people who are not going to talk because there's just this kind of silence around big oil, but those guys are more independent, and I think they felt well, no one really understands our perspective, we should say something.
When I was watching your doc, and we see all this oil spilling, we see the oysters coming in covered in the oil, and we see the shrimp that it might appear to be white, but inside is all this black stuff that he mentioned, and then you cut and we see a table full of shrimp, and they're eating it.
Well, that's actually
is
crawfish.
That crawfish?
Yeah.
Okay. So is that something, do you feel like that came up in those communities where the issue of eating the actual possibly toxic foods?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of like conflict there because a lot of people do like Roosevelt, one of the main characters. I mean, he used to, one of his supplemental sources of income would be he'd go fishing and catch a bunch of fish and then sell the fish like in the community. And then he got afraid to do that. He stopped doing it because he was afraid he might get people sick because he felt like the fish was contaminated. But he still goes and fishes for himself and eats that fish, you know, because he wants to eat fish and because he's done it his whole life. But I think he felt like the onus, so he didn't want to pass it on to other people. He could just only make that, you know, for himself, that decision. I think there's lots of conflict there because some fishermen off the record would say to me, it's still really bad out there. No one wants to talk about it because they don't want to, you know, influence. But then you see all these reports coming out saying it's totally safe, you know. And I think it's kind of one of those things that it's going to take years to know. You know, like the Exxon Valdez took a really long time for them to figure out the impacts of that oil. But the funny thing is, it's not being, like, BP funded all these things, like, right after the spill, and they withdrew a lot of the support. So a lot of things that were being monitored are not being monitored anymore. Right. And I feel like it is their responsibility to do that. I mean, I think it's, like, hard to think about, like, what are reparations for something like this? Like, what are reparations for a part of a culture being lost? Or what are reparations for, you know, someone's business being destroyed for, say, 20 years or 4 years? Like, how do you measure that? So I think people are still trying to figure out how to do that. And I think the sad part about it for me was that it seemed like people who had lawyers and knew how to sort of deal with all this paperwork were getting money, although some people were not. It seemed like really weird how the claim system worked. But then a lot of people the people shucking the oysters or peeling the shrimp, like, they don't really know how to, you know, game the system. They don't trust lawyers, and the people like doing the real work. I did not see those people getting money in the bayou when I was filming for 4 years. It seemed to be none of those people were getting money, and that was really tragic to me, just a whole overlooked population.
Your three on the documentaries kind of at least live in the same world or same setting, per se. Do you feel like you will continue to paint on the same canvas? It's
hard to say. Like, I just want to next time, like, do a subject that is really interesting to me, and I don't know what that is yet. I'm still, like, very much, like, I know everyone's like, think in advance of what you can pitch while your film is coming out. And I'm like, who the hell can do that? Because I can't, I mean, I have hard enough, like, focusing on, you know, this movie, there's so much stuff to do. So the superhuman who's doing that, I don't know, you know, I'm not that person.